Welcome to Talking Funny Cars, and this episode is brought to you by Peak, and we have a special guest, Mr. Jack Beckman, two-time NHRA World Champion, 36 events, wins as well. Jack, welcome to the show.
That was a mouthful, buddy.
It's a mouthful.
Good to be here.
And well-earned as well.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. You don't have elevator guys on the show, though.
Well, we do. You.
I do now.
You're the elevator guy. Yeah. Jack, welcome to the show. And I want to start off by saying I've been eager for this interview. This is one that I've looked forward to for a while. You know, John Force is someone that I grew up looking at as a superhero. You know, you got Superman, you got Batman, then you got John Force. And boy, you're doing an incredible job filling in for John Force right now. Let's talk about it.
June 28th, 1987. He won his first national event.
Yep.
And did it 156 times after that.
Yep.
And we get to still compete against Ron Capps. Ron is the second winningest funny car driver. I think he's at like 75, which is a total that's just to the moon. And it's not half of what John has done. What he's done is legendary. And people say records are meant to be broken. I don't know that many people ever get close to John's.
Yeah. Or will they?
Well, you'd have, I did the math. If you and I lived to be 128 and really go on the street, we might get close.
We may be able to get there.
Yeah. So you're asked what it's like to drive for him. I got a 14-year career driving for Don Schumacher Racing, and Don gave you everything that you needed to win.
Yep.
And we went head-to-head against the Force cars a whole bunch. You know, those were the two big camps in town. And June 28th, 1987 also happened to be my 21st birthday. So, and I've been a John Force fan since the late 70s in Orange County. So I'm not a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to liking John Force. My birth certificate says John Russell Beckman. I technically am a John.
That's awesome.
Never been called anything but Jack. Actually been called a few different things, but I've admired the guy forever.
Sure.
So when that phone call came, obviously nobody wanted Superman to get hurt.
Sure.
It was a bitter pill to swallow to think that, wow, that could have been the last run John Force makes in a funny car, or is it? But somebody's phone was going to ring to fill in for him. And I could think of a whole bunch of names above mine. Look, I don't live anywhere close to the shop. I fix elevators for a living. I didn't have a current funny car license. But when the phone rang, I made my physical appointment later that day.
Yeah, that's right. You figured it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, and driving, you know, and filling those shoes for John, you know, and doing such a great job. I must say you've done an incredible job. You know, it doesn't appear as if though you haven't driven a fuel car in 4 years. You filled right back in there. Is there pressure involved?
Well, I think there's pressure involved in fixing elevators.
That's right.
I think there's pressure involved in going in front of the camera and doing a podcast, right? And I think a lot of it's self-induced. Sure. The situation is what it is, right? And then people say, oh my God, I got this exam. I got so much pressure. Okay, I'm going to get in a fuel funny car. I got so much pressure. Well, then don't drive a fuel funny car.
That's right. Agree 100%.
Yeah. So you've got the option of you can go work for a living.
That's right.
And right now I do both. I fix elevators and my weekend gig's pretty cool. So sure, there's potential pressure. And then obviously, we're second in points. Our teammate Austin Prox in first. We're in a tight championship chase. And the closer this gets to the end of the year, the more potential pressure there could be in something. Yeah. So I'll take it, though, because the option is to be sitting in the grandstands feeling no pressure saying, why was that driver late? Or how come they let it get out of the groove? I'm enjoying this.
That's right. And you know, Peaks behind you, Chevrolet, Monster, all these great names, you know. And it seems like they've almost adopted Jack Beckman. I see the relationships out there, and it's cool to see it.
So people say, what's it like replacing John Force? Nobody could ever replace John Force. You just can't replace him.
He's not replaceable.
I'm keeping his seat warm. Whether that's short-term or long-term, I don't know. But when Robert Hite called me, he said, listen, I just want to find out if you're interested in doing this. I said, yes. And before he could get the next sentence out, I said, yes, 4 more times. He says, okay. But he says, I'm not offering you the job right now. He said, John and I have talked about this. We're okay with this. The family's got to be good with it. The team's got to be good with it.
Sure.
The sponsors have to be good with it. He goes, I need to go to Peak first. Then I need to go to Chevrolet. Then I need to go to all the other Cornwell and Monster and all them. And so when you say that Peak has adopted me or Chevrolet, they really have. I mean,
we see it. It's obvious.
The relationship is great. The fact that they're supportive of me getting in the car for Superman.
Yeah.
Because there's only one John Force.
There's only one.
You know, it's Rembrandts versus lithographs, right? Why do NASCAR drivers make so much more money than drag race drivers? Well, they're kind of sequestered. They got their own team of people. When they get in the car, they're on the racetrack and then they're done. We're in and out of the car, hopefully 8 times a weekend. And when we're not in the car, we're hanging out with the fans. They got great access to it. The nature of our sport is they get in the pits. So when you give people a lot more access to somebody, we're not worth as much as, say, a movie star that you can't see all the time. But there's only one John Force. There is only one. That guy can be a premium for whatever he does because there wasn't the mold for him. He was custom made, and God did a pretty good job on that.
Boy, you've had a great career, but you had a beginning, right? And that beginning is something that maybe a lot of people don't know about.
So in 2005, I ran 12 races in a Top Fuel dragster. Dexter Tuttle owned the car, and Roger and Karen Comstock, 2 great friends of mine who own Mail Terminal Services. And really, they've been on every nitro pass I have made, with the exception of the ones in John's car and maybe 2 other races. And they're really the reason I was able to transition to Top Fuel. I began my racing career in 1986 in Lubbock, Texas. 15:06 at 93 miles an hour.
How about it?
I still have the time slip. I was stationed in the Air Force 100 miles away in Clovis, New Mexico. Drove the car out there. I still own the car to this day. It looks way nicer today than it looked back then.
El Camino.
Yep. I took my driving test on my 16th birthday in that car. We just filmed some footage for Chevy last weekend at Force's shop, and that was cool to see John Force racing Chevrolet, and then they got a picture of my El Camino standing in front of that. My son Jason took his driving test at 16 in that car too. And
it's cool.
I'm still fixing elevators, and a good friend of mine, Mike, hardcore drag racing fan, I met him in 1988, shortly after I'd got out of the Air Force and started fixing elevators. And he said, I kept hearing about this guy that just wouldn't shut up. And all he ever talked about was drag racing. He said, I had to meet you. And he said, I remember from the get-go, from 1988, you said, one day I'm going to be in a Top Fuel car.
Yeah.
And he says, a lot of people say they're going to be in a Top Fuel car, but,
but you
got that shot. So, but between 1986 and 2005, there was a lot of runs.
Yeah.
And in 97, there was a point where I said, look, my parents aren't rich. My dad's not famous. How am I going to get there if I got a chance of getting here? So I went to the Frank Hawley School, upgraded my license to top alcohol dragster, and it opened a lot of doors, but not necessarily in the way I thought. I got to drive some other cool cars, but I got a job offer from Frank. And I quit the elevator trade in November 98, took a huge cut in pay, and went and started teaching with Frank at the drag race school. I never quit that job. From 98 to 2008, did all the classes at Pomona. We were running Pomona and Gainesville, and the way the economy looked, it didn't make sense to have both open. Closed down Pomona, so from that point on, I would only fill in if Frank really needed me. I just taught a class in Richmond in fall or summer of 2024, and so it was great to be back standing in front of those students. I left there to drive to Maple Grove and went to the final round of Nitro Funny Car. It felt good. But all those sportsman runs in between there. And I've watched a lot of sportsmen who got in the car thinking, if I don't make it to the pros, this is all a waste of time. That is completely the wrong philosophy. I loved every run I ever made in a sportsman car.
Yep.
If I never would have got that shot at driving a pro car, I certainly wouldn't have thought my life pertaining to drag racing was a failure, because I love drag racing. I never took a day off work, buddy, that was for vacation. Every day I took off, I was at the racetrack or driving to and from the racetrack.
Love it.
And all my overtime went into my race car. I worked on it in my garage, and I loved every bit of it. Now, the irony is, now that I'm a funny car driver, they won't let me touch the car.
Yeah.
I get out of red, so like, not
put the reach down.
Yep, we've got this covered for you. So so anyway, when I'm driving Top Fuel in 2005, people come and go, who are you? I never heard of you. Who's this new guy?
Yep.
Well, the new guy had 20 years of experience.
Sure.
But it wasn't with the TV camera covering it. And that was fine with me. Yeah, but I'm sure you've enjoyed every bit of it.
Every bit of it.
Look, there's skin knuckles, there's late nights, there's those bills, there's those broken parts. That stuff's not fun. You got to step back and look at the totality of it.
That's right.
It's pretty fun overall.
Coolest thing on the planet.
I agree.
Yeah. So the El Camino. I've been a fan of watching you rebuild the El Camino, the projects, the YouTube videos, all of it, right? At El Camino, how many wins do you have in the El Camino? Because that's also a daily driver. You got your license in it.
It's a cruiser. It literally has been sitting in my buddy's garage.
But you went down the drag strip.
Oh, yeah.
You raced it.
Well, even after I did the frame off, I took it out to Fontana before that drag strip closed. It was a 96-degree day. Street tires, I had to feather the throttle. It went $12.99, 105. And I thought, God, I ought to be a little faster than that. Then I went and weighed it. It was 4,200 pounds with me in it. So 20 years before that, everything I did was to make it light. Fiberglass hood, racing seats,
Sure.
and then no exhaust, obviously. Then I put all this weight back on the thing.
Yep.
And again, a lot like the racing. Yeah, the finished product or where you sit currently is pretty cool. But man, that journey getting from that car in pieces to I used my hands and my brain and my time and I turned it into this. That feels pretty good.
Yeah. And then from the El Camino, what was next?
As far as driving stuff,
I want to go through this.
Yeah, I bought my girlfriend at the time and I went in halves on a used Super Comp dragster. We called it Battle of the Sexes. And you had asked how many wins in the El Camino. And the answer to that question would probably be not as many as you might think. Because for the longest time, all I wanted to do was make it faster.
I see.
You know, changing jets, timing carburetors, all the stuff just because the time slip mattered.
Sure.
And then one time I'm loading my car up and I see a guy walking with a trophy. I'm like, wait a minute. I want to race for those. And I stopped screwing around with the car and racing for trophies. And one time I'm in line getting a trophy and a guy says, yeah, I made $5,000 last year bracket racing. I'm like, wait a minute. I want to do that. The car I won in the most would be the one that's in the NHRA museum right now.
The Super Comp car.
The Super Comp dragster. Yeah. So went from the Battle of the Sexes car, and then good friend of mine, Brent Cannon, and he and his wife Stacy are my kids' godparents. That's how close we are. Brent had a Top Fuel car in 72. When I had bought that used dragster in July of 91, I'm walking up and down the pits of LA County Raceway in Palmdale, California, and I had raced there hundreds of times. But when you're in the door car bracket classes, you pit over there. Yeah. The dragster guys pit over here. It might as well have been two different leagues. So I'm walking up and down and I saw this really clean car, and Brent had his name, Brent Cannon, down the side. I said, excuse me, sir, I've got some dumb questions. There are no dumb questions. And we became best of friends after that. And he's the one that really was the impetus behind saying, look, if we want to take this to the next level, let's build some brand new cars. We built sister cars, and he still got his, and I still got mine. He won 2 national events with his. I won 1 national event with mine, and another national event with his original car that he had sold to somebody else. That's a long story for another time.
Jack, we were talking about your kind of evolution of race cars. You know, you went from an El Camino to a Fuel Funny car. Let's just go straight into it. First runs in a Fuel Funny car. What were you thinking? Now,
there's a lot of people that aren't funny car people, and I get that. When that body comes down, your religion can change.
You can.
And in fact, Don told me, he said, listen, you need to come out. I want to make sure when we start this car and they lower the body, you don't pee your pants. Those were his exact words. In other words, he did not want to waste another week talking to the Comstock about putting a new business plan together if funny car wasn't going to be my thing. And a Fuel Funny car is light years different than a Sifka funny car. That was a 1982 Omni body, tons of room, tons of glass on that car that you could see out of, as opposed to this with a late model funny car. And it does take some getting used to, right?
It does, yeah. You know, when you transition from the dragster to the funny car, there is such a difference. You know, from a fan's perspective, you see this big, you know, nitro burning Hemi, you know, throwing fuel and throwing flames, and people say, well, it's got to be similar. No, they're not similar at all. And you know, that first run in the funny car, I want to hear about it. I want to know about, you were a dragster guy.
Yeah. So Todd Okahara and Phil Schuler were tuning the car. And that tune-up was really coming into its own during that period in later 2006. The wild thing is, it was a Whit Bazemore chassis with Gary Selzy's Stratus body on it, and that body had a #1 on it. The first time I ever stepped on the throttle in a big show nitro funny car, I had a #1 on the side of the car, borrowed from Gary Selzy.
It's cool.
And that 60-foot, my first time stepping on the throttle, remained my quickest 60-foot for about 4 months, just the way the car was tuned up. So I remember what Okahara said. Car left, went a little bit to the right, and then when I stepped off, it came back. He says, I liked what I saw. He said, because you were counter steering for the car, and then it was planned like a 330-foot run. And as soon as I stepped off, it settled back in the middle. He said, so you're not way behind the car. So I think we've got something to work with. And then my first race was going to be Maple Grove 2006. We flew out there and sat in the rain all weekend long. I don't even know if they unloaded the car. So Dallas 2006 was my first race ever in a nitro funny car. And I think I got beat by John Force at that race.
What a way to start.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Now let's circle back around. You got beat by John Force first round, your first race in a funny car. You're in John's car. Power level in that first fuel funny car you drove to now.
So the difference between a 4 flat and a 385, it sounds like nothing to somebody. It's a tenth and a half of a second, but your butt will tell you they're light years different.
Light years.
Because it's the G meter, right? It's how hard it's pushing you back in the seat. And a 4 flat run, if you put an average person in there, they would scream and say, oh my God, that's the craziest thing I've ever felt. But once you've made 30 runs at 4 flat, and a crew chief says, feel this. When they're going 385, they're pushing you back in the seat. Really, the most impressive part of the run isn't the first 100 feet. It's from 150 feet to 500 feet.
That's right.
And when you feel that thing trying to shove you back in the trunk like that, you're like, oh, we're on one. And people say it must be fun to drive a nitro funny car. I'm like, there's a lot of emotion, exciting, anxiety-ridden. There's a lot of things I could think of. Fun would be a passenger seat.
Yeah.
Fun would be once the parachutes are out and you're safely slowing down.
Yep.
You are so, and you would get this, you're so laser focused on the task at hand, right? I got my spot down track, I'm looking down there, I'm managing the steering, I'm getting ready on the chutes and lift, and all that stuff's got to happen, boom, 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 in the correct fashion at the right distance. I've never had time in the middle of the run to say, I'd like to let go of the steering wheel like I'm on a roller coaster and just scream because this is fun. It's intense.
Yep.
It's fun doing all the stuff, but that 4 seconds of acceleration, I'm not sure fun's the correct word for that.
Well, you drove in an era where we had the laid back headers, right? You were in the era where they laid back the headers and they were, at 500 feet, there was no steering there.
Well, so Cruz and Tim Wilkerson really had the first sets of laid back headers.
Sure.
And I was talking, my crew chiefs at the time with the Infinite Hero car were Jimmy Prock, John Medlin, Chris Cunningham. Chris Cunningham's still my...
What a group.
Oh, yeah. And I remember talking to Medlin early in the year. I remember talking to him at Gainesville saying, hey, Wilkerson's headers are laid back. He goes, yeah, so are Cruz's. And I said, well, Cruz's had the quickest runs the last 3 years. And I'm not saying this was my idea at all, but what happened is those guys later on in the year put their heads together, had some new pipes bent up for us. We went to Denver and we put them on for one run in qualifying. I think it was Q3 and it dropped a cylinder. We went back to the other headers. And the way we qualified, we wound up having, I think, Matt Hagan in the second round, and Jimmy and John said, screw it, put the laid back headers back on. We went on to win the race. The car got shipped to a golf course on a flatbed for a display for Infinite Hero. When it came back, Chris Cunningham checked because the way they tied the front end down and had to adjust the towing. We go to Sonoma, reset the national record by a bunch, but man, at 500 feet, the car's making a move. And we thought it was the alignment. And we kept playing with it to the point where it was hard for me to back the car up. It was like a shopping cart. We didn't realize till 4 or 5 other drivers put laid back headers on and started crossing the center line. It just changed the pressure center. It changed all the handling characteristics of the car.
Yeah. And what a challenge.
Yeah, if it wasn't challenging enough, right? It would be like somebody said, okay, now cover one eye and see if you can make a straight pass.
And Jack, you've been on fire. I mean, I remember one specifically where, the body was off the car, the supercharger was hanging off the thing, and within, 5 seconds of that all happening, you're on the mic saying, I'm okay, guys, I'm okay, guys. My goodness, what's that like?
I thought you were going to say what goes through your mind.
Yeah, we know.
Almost the back of the supercharger went through my mind. That was Epping 2016. I had never had a big explosion, and I would define a big explosion as the body breaks significantly. I had some fires. I'd had some engine issues.
You had all 4 tires and wheels off.
Oh yeah, So 2012
that was a big one.
Going into Pomona, we're leading the points. It's back when you made one at the finals. 1 run on Thursday, 1 run on Friday, 2 on Saturday. The Thursday run, I finally had my big boomer where the body came off the car. I'm like, okay, so that's what that feels like now. But the Epping one was kind of a whole different order of magnitude. One of the guys on the track crew told me later, he said we had to push the wall back. And at different sections of wall they're a lot thicker than K-rail. I said, no, it had to be there. He says, I'm telling you, Jack, we had to push the wall back. He goes, go look at the spall marks on the back of it. The explosion was so hard, it moved the wall. That's pretty crazy. Yeah. So people say, well, what does that do to you emotionally? I mean, aren't you a wreck when you get out of the car? I said, no, I'm really thankful when I get out of the car. Because once that devastation happens and you go into this response mode for it, your goal is to safely stop the car. once you get the car safely stopped, the goal is to get out of the car without getting run over by the track crew coming to get you.
Big time. Safety. So that was a big explosion for you. I remember it. I remember watching on TV and thinking to myself, what is a driver? I was a driver at that time doing that in that situation. And, we always try to learn from every single wreck that we have, right? Every wreck we have, some type of safety ends up changing. From that one, did you guys change anything on your car?
Well, I'm going to tell you this at the risk of getting in trouble. Not a fan of body tethers.
Yeah.
Not a fan at all.
Yeah.
Do we need to do something to prevent a body from getting into the stands? Of course. I think that there's way better ways to do that. So I understand the effort was to improve what could happen in that scenario. But we went through this with the sanctioning body years ago, and they backed off. And sometime in the 4 years I was away, they put them back on the cars, and I'm not big on that. But the Eric Medlin accident, we went from tight roll cages with rock hard padding to a really wide roll cage with thick progressive density padding in there. The head and neck restraints, going to the extra harnesses there to keep your body from moving this way. The fire extinguishing medium has gotten better in the cars. The undercoating on the body, you hate to use the term fireproof because fire is the only thing that's fireproof, right? But mitigates the chance of that fire getting into the body and then become smoldering. So if you look at safety from last week to this week, you wouldn't notice any change. If you look at it from 20 years ago to now, even the fire suits are way better.
Yeah. Jack, we've talked a whole lot about funny cars today. We've talked a lot about your career, but what we haven't talked about is the people that we race against, our competitors, the characters, the guys that strap themselves in these race cars. And boy, you've been at it a long time and you've raced a lot of characters. And you're filling in for one of those characters, the of course the GOAT, the John Force that we all love so much. History have it, facts have it. You've beat John a lot more than he's beat you.
Yes, I have. Thank you. Sorry, John. Yeah, and people ask me that. What do you attribute your success ratio against John Force to? And realistically, a lot of it is we had the better tune-up most of those passes. Because your job as a driver in a nitro funny car, you can't push down harder and make the car quicker than the
wide open or not.
But boy, can you screw up what the crew chief did in there. I think a lot of people change their strategy based on who they're racing, and that doesn't necessarily serve you well. Al Hoffman hated John Force. I mean, hated him. And I think he felt like he had to hate him to beat him. When Al Hoffman had that huge wreck in Gainesville, stitches, and he was laid up in the hospital forever, Force came in there and Hoffman screamed at him for coming in there. He thought Force was trying to get in his head, when Force was just a caring guy and wanted to go there. I never have hated John Force. I've always loved John Force, but I don't love John Force enough to lay down against him if we're racing.
That's right.
I always felt, I guess honored's not too strong a word, elated, giddy to get a chance to pull up next to John Force and race him. So I feel like it put me in a real comfortable zone racing him. Like I'm going to tell my grandkids, no matter who gets there first. Yeah. And he's owned me a few times, and I've owned him a few times. But that always felt great. I still work for Frank Hawley, and let me back up here. I'm a drag race historian. So Frank Hawley won the Funny Car Championship in 82 and 83, driving for Austin Coyle and the Chi-Town Hustler. I got to race against Frank Hawley. He came back to drive Roger Burgess's car on a part-time basis. We raced twice. And we got to race in the final round, I think it's 08 or 09, in Maple Grove. I don't care who wins that race. I got to race against Frank Hawley, my boss, and one of my best friends. I did win, though, so which probably makes it a little bit cooler, but just to get a chance to do that. So 1984, Mark Oswald wins the world championship. Mark Oswald comes out of retirement for one race. I get to race against Mark Oswald. He beat me, only raced him one time. 85, 6, 7, and 8, Kenny Bernstein was Funny Car World Champion. I got to race against Kenny Bernstein. And then 90 and on, John Force obviously won the bulk of those championships, but I have raced against every one of those champions except 1989 Bruce Larson, and I want to get in a golf cart sometime and line up next to Bruce Larson just to say I've raced against every funny car champion since 1982.
It's amazing. What a story. And who's the guy that you get up for the most? There's got to be somebody. We all have that person.
I'm not that good, buddy.
I already have my person. We already got him.
But I'm going to tell you this. I'm not that good. And I don't mean that to be hyperbolic or humble. I'm not that good. I can't change my routine and think I'm going to have better results. Because if you can have better results,
100%.
Yeah, that giving it 110%. Well, what have you been doing the rest of the time? Giving it 84%? I've got to just do my best all the time. I would say I don't have stats in front of me. Ron Capps has probably owned me pretty much. Matt Hagan's probably got a pretty good record against me. But I like racing the people who have got some championships around their neck, and you know their A game is every time you go to the starting line.
Sure.
So now that being said, at Brainerd, I pulled up next to Blake Alexander, who's had a great career. He's won in Top Fuel and Funny Car. But if you're handicapping that race, he probably wasn't going to be one of the favorites to win the race. Kicked my butt on the starting line, and they outran us and went on to win the race. Yep. So you can't ever not be giving it your best out there, whatever percentage that is. So I try not to get up for anybody because I think I could get myself in trouble. So tell me who you get up for.
Well, it's like this, and we all have that person. And, my person is got to be Ron Capps right now. And it's got to be Ron Capps because John Force isn't out here. When John Force was out here, it was John Force.
Right.
You always, in my world, I'm very competitive. I always want to beat the best. Because if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. I never changed my routine. I never changed my approach. But at the finish line, I'm looking at the wall to see who won, if it wasn't obvious when I would run one of those two guys.
So first win back for me after 3 years, 9 months off, St. Louis, and Ron Capps is in the other lane.
Yep.
And they had gone through, I hate to call it a slump because that team really...
Oh, they're great all the time.
Frank Hawley's made a lot of amazing observations on things that have stuck with me. And one of the things he said years ago is he said, great crew chiefs still have slumps. Yep. But the difference is they're further between their slumps than an average crew chief, and they're a shorter duration of slumps. Yep. They don't go into a 5-race slump. They go into a 2-race slump. Yep. But anyway, the Napa car wasn't as dominant as it had been last year. And they were back. When we raced in St. Louis, they were back. You looked at their ETs throughout the weekend. We didn't have lane choice going in the final round. Yeah. We threw the kitchen sink at it, and our car goes out there, puts a cylinder out just past half track, which, figure this out if you're into math. 660 is half track, but we raced to 1,000 foot. Math doesn't work out on that anymore, does it? 500 foot. Anyway, at about 660, it puts a hole out, then it puts another hole out on the same side. And that car's moving towards the wall. And then we've got this boost over rev safety device, and it shuts the throttle off 70 feet before the finish line. And I just feel the throttle go dead. And about the time I went to say, as I'm pressing the chutes, the wind light comes on, which was easier to see because I was much closer to the wall than I would have liked to have been. And so to your point, if you beat a guy in the final that it's his first race ever and 3 people broke against him, and you beat Joe Jones from Missouri, whatever.
It's different.
But you beat John Force or Ron Capps or Matt Hagan in the final. The same size trophy, just feels a little better.
It's a big deal. Man, put in the timeout corner for 4 years. It was like Mom said, Jack, quit acting up, go in the corner. And you came back and you did it right. That's for sure. What was that 4 years like, and what was that phone call like from Robert Hight?
Not that I was counting, but 3 years, 9 months. Yeah.
Not that you counted.
And a lot of people said, you retired. I said, no, I got laid off. 2020 was going to be the end of the Chandler family sponsorship. I am forever indebted to Terry and Doug Chandler. I got 6 wonderful years with the Infinite Hero program, and we got to change lives. I got 14 years of driving a Nitro funny car, getting a paycheck to do it, and winning races. More than I ever thought, more than I dreamed of. And I knew someday it was going to end, and probably not on my terms. And you have to be an adult about it. That being said, I kind of feel blessed in some ways. Not that I lost my job driving a funny car, that after 22 years away from the elevator trade, I was able to go back. Earlier, you and I were talking, and I was speaking about a good friend of mine, Mike, that when I started in the elevator trade in '88, we became fast friends. He's a drag race junkie. I had spoken to him at the Bakersfield race in March of that year, and I said, I don't think we got anything for 2021. He says, let me make some phone calls in the elevator trade. He said, I think you can get back in. 1 week after my last race in 2020, I was back fixing elevators. I had a great job, a great career of something I actually enjoy doing. I really do like the elevator business. And I was lucky to have that because what else was I going to do? You're either driving a fuel car, talking about driving a fuel car behind a microphone, which there was no openings, or I had to go find a job somewhere. So I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to go back. I'm still a hardcore fan. I'd go to both Pomona races. My son Jason had designed a paint scheme for Chris King. So we went to the Chicago race in 22 or 3. But other than that, that was all I got. That was my immersion in the sport. Then I got the opportunity to announce with my new best friend, Ralph Shaheen. I got an opportunity to announce with Ralph at the Bradenton race at the beginning of 2024. And I'd never met Ralph, and he was a huge icon in the industry, and had a wonderful time announcing with him. And all that stuff reminded me how badly I missed participating. I love being at the ropes. Fan side of it's fine.
Yes.
Driver's side of it is a little bit cooler. I'm still a big fan, but when I went to the races, it's a lot like seeing all your friends playing together and you're not allowed to go play with them.
Yeah.
It's very hard to separate the adult portion of it from, man, I feel a little bit like an outsider now. So I did not take 3 years and 9 months off. Time went by as I had to work for a living and there was no opportunity to drive a car.
Yeah. And that phone call, Robert Height gives you the call. Jack, is this possible for you? Would you be willing to do this? What'd you feel like at that moment?
I was at work. I'm driving my work van.
Yep.
And the phone rings. And I look down and I see the caller ID. There was only one reason Robert could have been calling me.
Sure.
And it had been many days since the accident. And I figured by now they'd solidified a deal with somebody else. And the emotions that went through my mind in that 10 seconds where I'm trying to hit answer. Yes. You know, I mean, I know why he's calling.
Yep.
How do you sound cool when somebody's saying, hey, how's it going? Don't know if you're interested. I'm like, yes. The answer is yes, for God's sake.
Yep.
And again, he said, I'm not offering you the job. John and I have talked about it. We're good with it. But there's a whole checklist of people that have to sign off to make this happen. I just want to make sure you were interested.
Yeah.
And then I had to ride that out. I fibbed a little bit. I had an opportunity to get back in a good running top fuel car for 2 races the year before. And it would have been under the COVID era rules. But when the driver found out that the NHRA had rescinded those rules, he's like, I can't take the chance. So what happens is you get on that expectation high and you get the letdown. And in my life, I've learned just kind of ride the middle ground there. You don't want to get too excited because the letdown's going to be too much. And then, so the only person I told this whole time was my lady, Christine. I couldn't even tell my son, Jason. I was under obligation to not speak about this.
Very private.
And in case you haven't noticed, I'm a fairly communicative, chatty fellow, but I'm good at keeping a secret if somebody says so. And it was tough. As the days turned into weeks and my phone is blowing up with texts about people because they haven't announced the driver for John Force's car yet. I was never dishonest, but I couldn't be open with a lot of people that I was very close to.
Yeah.
And that was kind of tough.
Challenge.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I knew that when Team Force and Peak and Chevrolet were ready to do the release, I was going to be the one that was named in that release. So it was worth the wait.
And it was real, you know, as a fellow competitor, you know, I remember that release and you know, my first words to the Dunn family were, I'm glad they chose Jack, you know, well-earned, good guy, fits the mold. And it had to become real for you, your first trip to Indy, and seeing your name on that hauler and seeing your name, you know, on crew uniforms and, you know, seeing, you know, being a John Force fan and looking at that going, you know, this is real. I want you to describe to the world what that felt like.
So my first experience with seeing my name associated with that team, where it was real life, they'd showed a rendering for the hero cards, the handout cards, but it wasn't real. It was just a rendering. Christine and I were at a Walmart on a rainy night in Norwalk. Now, I had to fly to Norwalk to drive in John's spot for the Night Under Fire. They were contractually locked into that race. and I still didn't have a nitro funny car license. We had to use that event to re-up my license. So the night before, it's sprinkling, and I run into 3 of the crew guys inside Walmart there. Hey, we said hi, see you guys out at the track in the morning. Christine and I walk outside.
Were you in the automotive section? Getting some quick antifreeze?
I believe I was buying a watch because I broke mine.
Watch,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. And we walk outside to get in the rental car, and there's the Chevy Suburban tow vehicle there. And it says Peak on it. And on the side rear window, it says Jack Beckman. And I tapped her on the shoulder. I said, you've got to look at this. And it's something that might sound really silly to somebody else.
No, I get it.
And when you're 58 years old, you're like, how could you get excited about that?
Yeah.
Because that's John Force's tow vehicle.
Yeah.
I haven't even driven his funny car yet. And my name's on the side of that. And they got it on the back door of the hauler. And it started becoming real in bigger and bigger increments. And I still hadn't even sat in the car with it running. And the next day, I had flown to Indy to get fitted for the car. We pour a seat insert. They had to adjust the harnesses, shorten one of them up, move some of the controls around for me. So when we get to Norwalk, hours before we're scheduled to run, I said, let me get all my gear on, get back in the car, make sure everything fits right. So the car's up on jack stands. The body's sitting in the front of the pits. I'm not going to get in the car. They strap me in, and I'm thinking, I want out of here. It did not feel good. It just, I wasn't used to it. It was almost 4 years since I'd done that before. Thank goodness once it was on the ground with the body on, felt a lot better.
That's interesting. Yeah, it was just something that is a thought that went through your mind. It just wasn't comfortable for you.
Oh, it was horribly uncomfortable, like to the point of claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And I've had that a couple times where I've had a cold and you get in the car and once I'm in for 2 minutes, I can stay in for an hour, but that first 45 seconds, not fun. No, that first time on the jack stands, I'm like, ooh, this could get dicey. And then every time you step on the throttle, it just feels better and better.
Every time.
I actually have a question for you, buddy.
Okay.
During break, we were talking about Top Fuel and funny car, and you've driven both.
Yeah.
And you were talking about some of the differences, and you hadn't been in your Top Fuel car for a while and sat back in there. I think that's something that the audience would like to hear.
Oh, it's so different. You know, the difference between, the seating position of a Top Fuel car and a Fuel Funny car, they're not the same. Everything from, the actual position you're sitting in to what you're looking at. You sit in that dragster, and it's very similar to what I would say is, just, in your house. Go sit down, put your back against the wall, put your legs in front of you. That is what it's like to sit in a Top Fuel dragster. And vice versa. If you want to know what it's like to sit in a Fuel Funny car, get yourself a sitting chair just like the one I'm sitting in right now. Take a seat in it, and that's what it's like to sit in a Fuel Funny car. And we've driven them both, Jack. We've driven them both. And let's be real, when you're sitting behind that 12,000 horsepower, flame throwing, nitro belching, nitro Hemi, it makes you think a little bit different than when you're looking out that dragster. Because when you're looking out that dragster, what you see is this beautiful long quote unquote hood and the 2 front tires, your wings. So everything about it's different.
I love dragsters. And this is not a knock on dragster drivers at all. It almost feels like a little bit of a toy when you get in a dragster because, like you said, you're real low, the visibility is wonderful, and it changes the perception of everything. A funny car, you sit up higher, and everything's different with that body around you.
Yep.
And the driving characteristics are very different. Dragsters, I've always said, is like a Ferrari on the Autobahn, and a funny car is like a Winnebago with a 40-mile-an-hour crosswind.
That's right.
They're just different. But one of the crazy things that I don't know that anybody else has ever noticed is if you are in the water box, strapped in, and the crew is ready to start you up, dragsters are lonely.
Very.
You can't see any crew members. They're all back there.
Yep.
You don't know if they're playing a joke on you and they left and went back to the pits. In a funny car, everybody's lined up in front of you, and it feels like you're the quarterback and the huddle's ready to break. Dragsters are a little bit lonely in that regard.
That's right. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the difference between a Top Fuel dragster and a nitro funny car. And when we come back, we'll have more with Jack Beckman. This has been a great episode. And remember, if you want to take your vehicle's performance to new heights, you gotta give it peak. Just like our original equipment, technology, antifreeze, and coolant, our formulas match the vehicle manufacturer's technology requirements so that we have the perfect match for every single vehicle. That's the one reason why Peak is among the fastest growing brands of coolant in America. We work harder to earn your trust of people like you every day, and that's peak performance. Welcome back to Talking Funny Cars, brought to you by Peak with world famous Jack Beckman. We're going to get straight into our Funny Car Fast Five. And Jack, I think I know the answer, but who is your favorite funny car driver?
Force. Hands down.
Of course.
Prudhomme gets a definite honorable mention there.
Yeah. And your favorite racetrack? Doesn't have to be one on the NHRA circuit. It could be any.
I'm going to go with Pomona because working at the Frank Hawley School, I have spent countless hours on the starting line.
That's fair. And your favorite funny car run of all time? If you had to pick one.
Me driving.
You driving.
Ooh. And I had to pick one. Sonoma reset the national record in 2015 when we put the laid back headers on and changed the face of funny car.
It's fair. And your favorite funny car of all time?
The Army funny car. And you could pick the Monza or the Plymouth Arrow, but Prudhomme won everything.
Would agree. And describe what it's like to drive that Peak Chevrolet in just 15 seconds.
Okay, then I'm going to have to be already staged, locked in on the tree. Ambers come on, hammer the throttle, let off the brake, staring down track, keeping it straight, coming up. And I'll tell you, at 150 feet, the angel says, you got this. At 170 feet, the devil says, hold on, here we go.
Right.
When that clutch comes in on a fast runner, just crushing you back in the seat, but you got to keep focused, shoots out, lift, brake, slowing down.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is our Funny Car Fast Five with Jack Beckman. Jack, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been incredible. I've learned a lot about you and your career. Jack, is there any last words you'd like to tell the world?
Yeah, funny cars are cool. And it was fun to get to talk about not just funny cars, but racing. And the only thing cooler than this is strapping up and lining up side by side.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Beckman. Tune in for future episodes on Talking Funny Cars with Buddy Hall.